Welcome to On the X. My guest today is Dave Berke, a retired Marine Corps pilot, combat veteran, and one of the most respected leadership instructors working today. Dave's military career was anything but ordinary. He flew combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan in the F-18, served as an instructor and training officer at Top Gun, and was handpicked as the first Marine to fly the F-22 Raptor. He later became the first operational pilot qualified in the F-35B and commanded the Marine Corps' first F-35 squadron. Dave also deployed to Ramadi as a forward air controller, embedded with the Army's 1st Armored Division during some of the fiercest fighting of the Iraq War. Since retiring, he's continued to serve by helping others lead. He's now the Chief Development Officer at Echelon Front, where he trains leaders in business, sports, and life. And this fall, he's releasing his first book, The Need to Lead, the 3rd volume in the Extreme Ownership series started by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. So here we go with Dave Berke on the X. Maybe we'll start here. Was the carrier landing in the zero blackout? I was like, when I read that, because you're sort of talking about it and you're coming in and you're like, whatever the terminology, you can't see the ball and everything. And then you're like, oh my God, I was on the flight deck. Like I just, I hit the deck.
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit. And the fact that the other guys are coming in doing this.
Yeah.
And everyone's watching the, what's it called? What's the TV called in the ready room with
the Platt? Yeah.
Yeah, the Platt, right?
Yeah.
But you guys call it something else.
Danger TV. Yeah. Danger TV.
TV.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
it. Yeah. And I've been in those types of ready rooms, right? I've been on carriers,
totally.
Been in there and I remember, seen that. But yeah, talk about that experience, because that to me, I can't even imagine something like that and how that's even done. Like, was that just a situation where, I know this has nothing to do really with leadership, but maybe we'll talk about the lesson learned out of that.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, there was a lesson there. It certainly
so
at the time.
Just talk about that. I mean, like, how does that even work, I guess? Or how did that happen without you even being able to see anything?
It's a good question. You could probably tell from reading the book, I actually didn't really know how it happened.
Right.
Because the thing that I took away from it was literally like, what just happened? So just the mechanics of it, and I guess we're running off and running here now, which is
great.
Like
I said, they figure out when to start it and all that. It's running.
They don't do that stuff. Perfect. And man, I hope I block out enough time. I gave us an hour and 15. I hope that's enough. If not,
oh yeah, we'll be fine. We usually done. I try to keep it to about an hour.
I could go forever on this. Like, let's talk about the carrier. I'm like, oh, I think I just used all the time available. But so in that case, man, like, and I don't want to bore you with the details that are inside there of the weather, but the bottom line is, like, obviously as you read it, like, the weather's, I mean, the ship basically sails into a snowstorm. So you're in this jet and you're like, you can't really tell you're in a snowstorm until you realize what's happening. But ultimately the ship's like, hey, the weather is so bad. They announced this in a particular way. The weather's so bad that you're not going to be able to see the ship. And in the cockpit, you're just like, I cannot do this. I don't know how to do this. And what you end up doing is mechanically, you're just flying your procedures like to be quite like you're in a simulator. There's nothing to see. There's nothing outside. You get a little sensation, you feel the airplane. So it's not quite like a simulator, but ultimately you're looking at your displays. The thing that's kind of remarkable is if you do it really well, you will be really close to a good landing. But without seeing the ship, you really just can't make the final corrections in the last, I'll call it 8 or 9 seconds, that are really just necessary. And so when you have what's called a 0-0 landing, where you come in, you get behind the ship at 3/4 of a mile, you're about 18 seconds from landing. You're supposed to tell the ship, hey, I see you. I see all the instruments. I see the meatball, like from Top Gun. I see that indicator, and I'll take over visually from here and I'll just fly it. And it's, no big deal. So when you get to that point and they're like, hey, do you see the ship? And you're like, no. And you basically say, in that case, like, aircraft 206 is Clara, which is me saying, I don't see it. What's crazy about that is the people on the flight deck, the landing signals officer, the LSOs, which I ended up becoming, they can look up and they can see you. And at the time that I said I couldn't see them, they came back and were like, we don't see you either. So just keep going for a little bit longer. And there's a term for that. They basically say, keep it coming, which is their way of saying, like, I'll just get a little closer. And it's crazy to talk about it now, but at the time you're like, oh my gosh, this can't be good. And I'm so nervous. And I get to a place that I would say I'm probably within 1 or 2 seconds of them saying, "Hey, you're gonna have to leave because this isn't safe." One of the guys sees my big landing light in the nose of my jet, this big, giant, bright spotlight, and he basically says in Navy vernacular, "I see you." And so with about 5 seconds left, he's basically telling me I'm lined up to the right and I'm low. So he says, "Come left, power." And he kind of yells it. So I make a big correction to the left and a big power correction. I'm literally seeing nothing. I am just responding to what he says, almost like blind faith. And what happens is I land on the deck. I never saw anything. And landing when you catch a wire is it is undeniable. I mean, it is instantaneous. You like, I'm stopping. You don't feel like wondering. You
Yeah.
just know you're stopping. And I landed and kind of taxied away from the landing area to get off essentially the ship's runway. And the entire time I was telling myself, I don't know what just happened. This landing signal officer was able to see my light, and based on what he saw, he could tell the light was low and off center. And he just gave me a verbal command that I followed. Thank God I followed it correctly. That was just enough to get me into the wires. And like you alluded to, the takeaways, when I went downstairs, everybody's like, "Oh, great job, dude. That was awesome. That was amazing. High fives." And for a little while, I was thinking, I was awesome. Like, look what I just did. And I came to realize, like, I had that moment. And like you said, I didn't know at the time, like, this is some big leadership lesson. I was just scared out of my mind and then thankful to be alive. I came to the conclusion, like, why is everybody telling me I did a good job? I didn't really do anything. And that was really that ultimate lesson of like, holy cow, man. I used to think I was so important. I'm by myself. I'm in an F-18. This is the coolest job ever. I'm the coolest guy ever. And I literally have no idea how I landed that plane. I,
Mm.
and I couldn't account for that. And so what I realized was like, there were just things going on. It was the first time to get outside my own ego and my own head of like, I'm doing all these things, which by the way, when you're by yourself in a jet, you tell yourself, I'm doing all these things. And then you have this reminder of what to me was like the biggest reminder of my career of like, you are not really doing that much. And you certainly can't be taking credit for what you just did. It's all these other people doing it. And you know the Navy as well as anyone. The number of unsung heroes, faceless, nameless, anonymous sailors just doing the work that get no credit and no recognition. Without them, I don't land that plane on the deck.
Yeah.
I learned that day.
Yeah. I will say I do have the experience at least of being trapped and launched, catapulted off of on a cod, right? Like
Yeah,
not
totally,
flying
man.
it clearly, but just being a passenger. And what's so funny about that too is, as you know, you really can't. You're in a cod, you can't see anything, right? Like I mean, they got like I think little tiny kind of bubble
And you're
windows on the
probably
side.
backwards too, right? Some of you are
You're
sitting backwards.
backwards.
Yeah.
That's the other thing,
Totally.
right? Yeah. So when you launch, you get thrown into the restraining harness, and then
Yeah.
you get thrown against the seat. So I at least
Yeah.
do that, have that experience, and know what that feels like, and have slept underneath that stuff too. When you
Good.
just hear
Yeah.
slamming over and over and
Yeah.
things that the the guys that were in that like that stateroom or the bunk room or wherever I was staying. I think I did that when I was like a midshipman on a I was on a med cruise on the TR and the guys that were in that were talking about when they got some shore leave, like, got some liberty and went ashore. It was like they couldn't even sleep. They were like, "Can someone please bang on a trash can or something so I can go to sleep?"
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyway, so I want to get into the lessons from your book and kind of all the leadership stuff in here. The Need to Lead is the name of it, which very clever. Got it. Like,
There you go. Yep.
reference there as a Top Gun instructor and pilot. But I'm going to assume most people who are listening to this don't know you. So let's just get a little bit background on you. Like, what got you interested in flying in the first place, got you into the Marine Corps, and a little bit, you have a very unique resume, which is, I mean, the amount of, or the number of aircraft that you were qualified to fly, I think is completely unique inside maybe the entire military. Am I right on that?
Yeah. I was super lucky,
Yeah.
man. It is definitely one
4,
of
right?
career.
4
Yeah.
fighter
4.
aircraft that you
Yep.
were qualified to fly. That's pretty
Yeah.
amazing. In fact, when I wrote to my brother-in-law and like, hey, do you know this guy? And he's like, nah, I sort of know of him, or we know. He was like, but his resume, like he flew this and this and this. He's like
Yeah.
really impressive background. So yeah, so just kind of walk people through a little bit of your background there, like what brought you into the Marine Corps, making
Yeah.
you want to fly, all that. Yeah.
Well, certainly working backwards, I had this crazy career and got to do a bunch of things. not the least of which is a fact tour with a bunch of Navy SEALs in combat, which when you grow up wanting to be a pilot, that's never in the calculus. But unlike you, and I loved hearing about, I think sounds like everybody you know is in the military. I grew up, I had no connections, like nobody in my family, no relatives, no anybody. And so the random thing about my life is that when I was 5 years old, my parents moved to Orange County, California, Southern California, and it happened to be right next to a Marine base called Marine Corps Air Station El Toro. And so my indoctrination to the military was literally just geographic good luck, where my parents moved into a little house right off the flight line of El Toro. So from 5 years old until like literally the time I get into the Marine Corps, I lived underneath the flight line. And if you know anything about, jets, they're just loud. And so when a jet flew by, I would look up. And I think just after a while, like it just became part of just this part of my life where Marine jets were literally a daily occurrence in my life. They had an air show once a year, big, massive air show, because the West Coast based this El Toro Air Station had F-18s and A6s and A4s. And so the Blue Angels would come. It was a big thing. So once a year, I go onto the base. My mom would take me and I would watch the air show. But every other day, I'm still seeing these fighter jets. And it was always just, fascinating to see and watch. And then I hate to be cheesy, but like Top Gun comes out when I'm 14 years old. So you can picture like 14 is a really influential age. You're old enough to know what's going on in the world, but you're young enough to kind of think you could do anything. I had grown up around these jets, and then I see in this movie, like, I want that to be my life so badly. And when I made the connection that you could be both a Marine, and I just love the Marine Corps, I was around the Marine base, and you could be on carrier aviation. About 14, I'm like, I want to fly Marine jets on Navy carriers. And that was it, man. It just set me on this path. Had I not moved there, I really don't think any of this would have gotten into my bloodstream. And I don't think it would have happened. It was just total good luck that's where we lived. Just so random. And that set me on the path.
It's funny. I come from the exact same background in a way. Like I'm Top Gun generation as well. I'm a few years younger than you, so I think I was 11 when the movie came out. But I, like you, sure, there's lots of people I know now that are in the military, but I grew up in suburban Massachusetts. I had no military affiliation whatsoever. My parents were I didn't know anybody in the military growing up. I don't remember knowing anyone. But like you, I saw Top Gun and I thought, that's a job? Like that's a real job. You can do that as a job. I was like, well, that's awesome. I totally want to do that. That's what made me want to go to the Naval Academy. And then I only found out about SEALs kind of probably at the academy, somewhere like like I really didn't know anything about it. It wasn't like it is now where it's all over the place and we know,
Yeah.
it's all these stories and everything. It was really shrouded in mystery. And when I found out about that, I was like, oh, I like that even more. That looks harder. That was really the appeal to me. But I'm totally like you in that regard. And so, yeah, everyone I know now I've got tons of friends who are pilots, and mostly all my company mates from the academy, they were all, none of them were fighter pilots, but they were, like C2 pilot, S3 pilot, helo pilots, things like that, that kind of thing. So then talk just a little bit about your career then, and then how did you end up working with SEALs in Ramadi, and you're working with TF Bruiser, right? With Jocko and Leif.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously that's a story now that that people know well. And so how'd that all go down?
Yeah, that's another road where you could never have mapped that out to happen the way that it did. And if you tried to replicate it, you couldn't, because it was just too many random things happened. But, my old dream as a kid, I wanted to be a Marine, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot, but I really wanted to be a Marine. That was a huge part of it. And I had opportunities in high school and college to consider the Air Force and even the Navy for a little bit. But in the end, I just felt like that influence of being around Marines was so powerful that I just wanted to be a Marine. It just something that was really important. What's interesting about that is it worked out. I ended up getting commissioned in the Marine Corps. I'm lucky enough to get a chance to go to flight school. I go through all the process of flight training, and I ended up in jets. And I end up in a fleet squadron flying Marine jets off carriers, which is kind of how I always imagined it. And the highlight of all that was I'm flying off carriers, stationed in San Diego, flying single seat F-18s. I'm in a Marine squadron. I'm living my childhood dream. I do a combat deployment to Iraq. I do a combat deployment to Afghanistan. I go to Top Gun as a student, all these things like kind of out of the script of the movie. And I go back to be a Top Gun instructor after my student course that I went through and after I go to Afghanistan. So I'm teaching at Top Gun. I end up being the senior instructor at Top Gun as a Marine. So in all these things on paper, like you couldn't script this any better than the movie did. And it's exactly what I want. But
Yeah.
there was this one tiny little thing nagging me in the back of my head about that experience was as a Marine, I went through all training for Navy Marine Corps is naval aviation training. It's on Navy bases. As a Marine, I'm attached to carriers, a lot of Navy association there, Top Guns at Navy school. I really was thinking, okay, I've done everything I was ever going to do. I flew the F-16 at Top Gun. There was just this little piece like, wow, I don't want to leave the Marine Corps without doing something that I thought was uniquely Marine. And listen, I love Top Gun. I love flying off carriers. I love naval aviation training. But the Marine component of me was strong enough to say, if you're going to leave the military, leave the Marine Corps, having flown F-18s and F-16s, all this stuff, do something uniquely Marine. So as I'm leaving Top Gun, I'm of course kind of tagged to go train, be a senior instructor at a squadron. And I'm like, no, I want to go be a FAC, a forward air controller. That's a
Yep.
Marine. That's a unique Marine thing. No other service takes their pilots and puts them on the ground. But when I said FAC, I'm like, I'm going to be in, a non-deploying, I'm going to be a training FAC, like, So I volunteer and I get selected to do this FAC deployment, this FAC tour to Japan, which is exactly what I wanted. I'll do a year in Japan. I'll say I was with a real Marine unit. I'll say I was a real Marine for a year. I got the Marine Corps experience. I'll come back from that. I'll owe a couple years flying and I'll get
I
out.
love how you say real Marine, by the way.
Well,
Yeah.
I say that, and you know what I mean by that. Even the
I do
pilots
know
are
what
like,
you
"Yeah, I
mean.
know
Yeah.
what he's getting at," but that's what's in my head at least, which is a little bit obscure, but I just wanted a unique Marine Corps experience. And that was the only thing if I had said I was lacking anything from flight training, carrier time, Top Gun time was the uniqueness of the Marine Corps. Well, lo and behold, I do this Marine Corps FAC tour. As soon as I get there, I'm in Japan. They need volunteers to go to Camp Lejeune, Marine Corps base, Marine Corps Anglo unit, to deploy to Iraq. And I'm like, I can't in good conscience stay in Japan on this non-deploying tour when there's a war going on and they need volunteers. So I volunteer. Hey, I'll go to Lejeune. I'll leave Japan on this good deal Okinawa deployment, and I'll go to Lejeune and deploy to Iraq. And then as the senior guy, I was responsible for assigning the locations of all the teams, the FAC teams that were in this unit. I can remember the CEO was like, just there's 26 teams, there's 26 locations, write down where they're going. My best friend at the time, this was late 2005, was in Ramadi as a Marine FAC. And that's where the war was. So I'm like, good grief. So I have no choice but to volunteer for Ramadi. I just felt like I had to do that. What ended up happening is I show up to Ramadi, and what I get asked to do when I get there is I'm going to support the Army and the Navy. So the very first thing I get to is I'm going to be a Marine supporting the Army because the Army doesn't have Marine Corps airplanes. Marine Corps airplanes were in the war. I knew Hueys, Cobras, Hornets, and Harriers. And then within a couple, maybe 6 weeks of getting there, some guy named Leif Babin, who's a Navy SEAL, walks up, is like, "Hey, we're doing some missions. Can you help out?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's what for the rest, of course." And the rest is history. I end up doing basically every major operation Task Unit Bruiser did in Ramadi in 2006 at the height of the insurgency. I was essentially with them. And so that entire deployment, as I'm thinking, I'm going to be a real Marine, I'm very closely connected to Lace Platoon and Jocko's task unit, and obviously formed a really, really tight relationship with them. And so my unique Marine experience was again working with the Navy, which is kind of ironic. But it was downtown Ramadi, height of the insurgency, way more than I bargained for. And you obviously understand combat as well as anyone. That was way out of my comfort zone from being a Top Gun instructor, as you can
Yeah, I'll
imagine.
bet. I'll bet. Task unit, by the way. I think I said TF earlier. So it's been a while. Um,
All good.
the so just a couple more questions kind of on pilot stuff because I'm really I'd love to geek out on this just a little bit because it's funny for somebody who was so enamored with it as a child and wanted to do it. I know nothing about like I literally know basically what's in movies. So a
Yeah.
couple questions. How close is I mean obviously the sort of the drama aside from it. How close is Top Gun as an institution to what's portrayed in the movies?
Some things are correct. And
Yeah.
this is 2 hours depicting an institution that's over 50 years old. The things they got right are things like people show up and humility is a problem. Fighter pilots have
Mm.
egos, and
Yeah.
they depict now they don't depict it quite perfectly accurate, but the idea that you'd have some young, brash, arrogant pilots thinking they're better than anyone, nailed it. Like, that's how we all are. Um, it's an ongoing thing. Now, in that regard, students show up to Top Gun, there actually is a ton of humility in terms of being willing to learn. They don't show up and think they're better. We tend to show up just not realizing how much more there is to learn. One of the
Mm.
drawbacks to being selected to Top Gun is you're typically, I hate to say it, but you're kind of competing with your peers. And maybe a squadron will get lucky. They'll get to send one pilot to Top Gun in a year. And if you get picked to go to Top Gun, there's a party thinking like, I guess I'm better than everybody else. And I guess I'm at the top of my game. And I guess I'm number one. And that's not necessarily true, but there is some truth to it. So when you just show up to Top Gun, it's hard to realize just how much there is to learn. And so one of the things Top Gun teaches is humility to a group of people who naturally have very big egos that need to be checked. So Top Gun gets that right.
Mm.
And another piece that they got right in the movie, especially the second movie, not so much the first one, but the second one is, I don't know if you remember that scene where Maverick is taking all the young Top Gun guys and he's going to do one-on-one against all of them.
Mhm.
And he completely just beats the hell out of all of them.
Yes.
That's accurate. Students
Oh,
show up.
wow.
The students show up and they aren't even close to the caliber of the instructor. And they kind of
Okay.
depicted in the first movie, Maverick shows up and he kind of beats the number 2 guy and he's keeping up with the CO in that first movie when he's fighting against, Jester and he's fighting against Viper, like not even close in real life. So in the second movie, they did a nice correction where Maverick as the instructor is significantly better than the students. They hit the nail on the head on that. The students show up and part of the humility comes from realizing the instructors are significantly better. Now, listen, the only reason they're better is because they've been doing it more and training more. It doesn't
Yep.
mean they're better people or more talented. It just means they're just more skilled and capable and competent. But when a student shows up to Top Gun, he can't even come close to keeping up with the instructors. And the
Oh,
second movie really did a good job with that.
okay. Super interesting.
Yeah.
That's not, I would not have guessed that that's the case. But I will say, you describe in the book, in one of the chapters, basically doing that. You're having a dogfight with the CO of Top Gun.
Yeah.
And you're not even a student, right? You're the training
Oh, no,
officer.
no. Yeah.
Right?
That's a
And
that's a
and
yeah.
you and he beats you, and it like,
Yeah.
it read basically like a scene from Top Gun. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, that sounds like it's pretty accurate, close to the movie. Um,
But yeah,
Go
that's a
ahead.
tough one for me, but yeah.
Oh.
The worst
Um,
part about that is I wasn't a student. A student when I was a student there, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna lose. And I'm gonna learn a bunch of stuff. I
yep.
was the training officer, the senior instructor. I was at the top of my game. I was as good as I was ever gonna be. And I still fell in the same trap of like, oh, I'm gonna win. I'm better than this guy. And when this guy beats me in this 1v1, which I wrote about in great detail of what he did and how he did it, he was like, come on, man. Am I ever gonna be at that level? And the answer is no, there's always someone better than you out there. And that was
Yeah.
a reminder of that is when you start to believe your own press, you start to think you're the best, you are setting yourself up to failure. I called it complacency. You could put other words around it, but that was a humbling loss because I was at the top of my game and I'm still losing. That's a bummer, but it was a good lesson. It was a really good lesson.
Yeah. A couple other things on this. Can you explain to people why because I'm sure when people watch those movies, why there's a one-seater version of an aircraft and a two-seater version of it, why that exists and how it's different?
Well, historically, when you look at like the F-14 Tomcat, the iconic original Top Gun movie plane that everybody knows, that
Yeah.
famous fighter from that movie. There was a time, technology-wise, when you started putting radars and technology inside of airplanes, there was simply too much going on that the
Okay.
person in the back, the radar intercept officer, the backseater of the Rio, was a dedicated running of that radar system and managing that. And no pilot could have, at that time in technology, could have done both. By the time the F-18, the F-16, and some other newer airplanes start to come out, and I was right at the upswing of that. That's early 80s technology starting to come out and hitting the fleet when I get in there in the 90s. The technology just evolved to the point and the interface, the software interface of the pilot and the computers had just gotten so much better and so much easier that now a single seat pilot could manage all those systems himself much better. And now we're at a generation now, F-22 and F-35, the interface, the user interface is so simple, it's so intuitive that you can really manage a lot more work with just one pilot. But not too long before that, it simply couldn't be done. That F-14 needed two people to segregate the different components happening, because you'd get overwhelmed if you're trying to do it all yourself.
But doesn't F-18 has both, right? Isn't there a two-seater and a one-seater version?
There is.
Why?
That's a good question. The F-18 has two variants, and I think the biggest discriminator is that two-seat variant, certainly for the Marine Corps when they had two-seat. One of the mission sets that the Marine Corps really put a lot of weight on was that airborne forward air controller, the FAC-A. That's a
Mm-hmm.
really busy mission. You're in the air coordinating all these fires.
Got
And
it.
there is a
Okay.
belief, and in a lot of ways, some validity to that belief, that you could get oversaturated as a single seat pilot. And so that's really the origins and the history for the Marine Corps of that two-seat variant. And then there's some other missions, reconnaissance and otherwise, where having that second person back there really gave just some bandwidth to some really complex, complicated missions. For the
Mm,
most part, the F-18 is designed where the single seat pilot can do just about everything himself. That's how I flew and trained for the most part. I have seen some really great two-seat crews do some really incredible work, though.
okay, got it. All right. Last fighter pilot question, and then we'll
Hit
get
me.
into the book stuff. I'm just curious, with the advance of technology and unmanned aerial platforms and
Yeah.
just even the way we see warfare going,
Yep.
is dogfighting a skill that's going to be needed in the future?
Yeah, that's a totally good, fair, valid question that you're gonna get a range of answers. I'm not sure if my answer is the most popular in my community, but I will offer you my opinion on the skill of dogfighting is not that relevant to the idea that I would be in a dogfight in combat. The reason the skill of dogfighting is so critical is that is how you learn how to fly an airplane to its absolute
Mm,
limits. And flying an aircraft to its limits doesn't just mean in a dogfight, but if there's a mission that teaches a pilot the absolute limits of the envelope of what he can do to maximize the capability, one against one is where that happens. It doesn't mean you should expect to be doing a bunch of one against one dogfights. In fact, if I'm in a modern fighter like an F-22 or F-35, which by the way is kind of invisible to radar, it's a stealth airplane. I don't want to be in a dogfight spinning around. It's super predictable. Everybody can see it. It's a bad place to be. Actually, I'm going to try to avoid that. It doesn't mean I don't want to be able to do it, but it's a mission set that's super narrow and very unlikely. But the skill of dogfighting translates to every other thing you do in an airplane. And if you are really good at dogfighting, BFM, one against one, you probably have a very, very good handle on exactly where to maximize the capability of your jet. That translates everywhere.
got it. That makes a ton of sense. Okay, that answers the question.
Right on.
So let's talk about the book then. So as I
All right.
understand it, the way the forward here is by Jocko, and the
Yeah.
way it reads is that this is sort of the third book in their like in the series, so to speak, right?
Series.
You
Yeah.
go extreme ownership, dichotomy of leadership, and this would
Yeah.
be sort of the third book
Yeah.
written by you. How'd that come about? Like, was this your idea, or was this Jocko and Leif saying, "Hey, you
Yeah.
should write this book, and we're gonna make it part of the series"?
Yeah, even you saying that kinda cuts both ways because it's super daunting, it's super intimidating. There is no, like, replicating extreme ownership and the impact that book had, not just on business, but on everybody, and even just from a philosophy that is just good for mankind and humankind in general. And so you have Extreme Ownership and Dichotomy, two of the most, I think, valuable and impactful books ever written in that space. And to say that I'm writing the next in the series, in one sense, I'm like, I can't measure up to that that standard. But one of the things that I did come to realize, and this is really driven by Leif and Jocko, and I got to give Jocko a lot of credit, was he had been kind of hounding me to write a book for a while. And I essentially was like, I'm not going to write a book. Like, there's no reason for me to write a book. Everything that I think people need to know has already been captured. And what he really impressed upon me was two things. One is our company, Echelon Front, we are teaching leadership. And as much as the foundations come from extreme ownership and dichotomy, we had grown and evolved and expanded as a company that we were teaching a lot of things we hadn't written about. So there was a need to capture more of these lessons in the way we taught it, which was valid. The other thing they impressed upon me was like, hey, man, you have to think about this not just in terms of writing the book, but if you have a lesson that you've learned in your life that can help other people, you have an obligation to get that out. You have an
Mhm.
obligation. And if you're not doing that, you are not meeting your fullest potential. Now, I think what makes me very lucky is that we had a platform by which I could do this in a book connected to those two. So there's going to be an audience and people receptive to that idea. But his point was like, you're not writing the book to sell books. You're writing the book to get this lesson out there, and you could do it in a whole number of ways. You could have you could have a podcast, you could have a blog, you could write it just and share it with. He's like, you have to write this because these are lessons that you have to share. And if you look back on your career, you have lessons that you have learned that you have an obligation, if you want to reach your potential as a person, to capture and share with other people. And I sat on that for a long time. And at some point, I realized he was right. And I learned that carrier lesson is a perfect example. If I don't share that lesson, someone has to learn that lesson themselves. And I might be able to help someone by explaining what I screwed up and learn from that and how it applies. And that can make someone's life better. And extreme ownership has a following. And so I'm lucky to have that opportunity. And so I was essentially given that responsibility, and it took me forever to do it. And I have done it. I don't know if I did it well, but I definitely forced myself to think about the lessons of my life and what shaped who I am as a person and try to share that in a way that can help other people. And I had an obligation to do that. And Jocko really pushed me to make that happen.
Yeah. So talk about then maybe there's you kind of have two parts of this book. You have sort of the mindset part, which is the
Mhm.
first section, and then the actions, like mindset of a
Yeah.
leader, actions of a leader, part two. And it's all based, it's very much it's in the format of prescriptive nonfiction. You kind of talk about experience in your life. You then sort of highlight what the principle is, and then a
Yeah.
real world application, usually with some company you're working with at Echelon Front. So just out of the mindset stuff, I mean, so the five that you have in there, every problem is a leadership problem. Humility is the most. Oh, actually, I want to ask you this. I
Yeah.
think you already answer it, but is that it for you? I always ask when I'm talking to somebody who is based in the leadership space, what's the most important characteristic of a leader, or maybe two? Is it humility for you?
Yeah, undeniably. We could
Okay.
talk along about depth and other things that I would say, like open-mindedness is a really important attribute, but you can see that is connected to humility. And so I think the top level of all of that is what I explain and what has been talked about in extreme ownership and other places is the concept of humility. Without that, you're going to fail. There's really no two ways around it. Now, a lot of things are connected to humility, but the short answer is yes, humility is the most important
Okay.
attribute.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. I mean, obviously that's what Jocko said too, but I've had other things in there that are sort of I think are important too. I think it's just where you
Totally.
rack and stack it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
obviously that's a difficult question. Saying what's the one thing is not necessarily even a fair question. It's like, well, it's more than one thing, right? But I
Yeah.
agree. I mean, I do think that that's an extremely important part of it. Look, you just said it with the Top Gun students coming in and thinking, oh, they're all hot shit, and it's like, no, you can just get dusted by by the
Yep.
instructor, right?
Yep.
So then the other three things that are in this, basically complacency being a bad thing, detachment being a good thing, and I would say perfectionism being a bad thing and not attainable, right?
Yeah.
So maybe
Yeah.
talk about because I'm not sure I've seen those exact phrasings in other leadership books. So maybe talk a little bit about those three principles and
Yeah.
specifically how you, I think, look, it's great to get the military lessons from this, but how they apply in the work you do now at Echelon Front, because that's the most applicable to anybody who's
Yeah.
listening to this, is most likely in a company or they're an entrepreneur or they're working with people, whatever their leadership role is, and that's where they're going to apply it in their own lives.
Yeah, and it should be pretty obvious. I mean, I certainly didn't invent any of these concepts. When I'm talking about humility, that's an attribute people have been talking about forever. And so I don't want to give the impression that like I somehow f- thought of something that's never been thought of before. I think what was the compulsion to write it, and I think what makes it unique, at least in my mind, is a lot of my training at Echelon Front, we are taking the principles we learned, we're working with companies, and we're digging into in every chapter of the book is some real problem they had, whatever the challenge might be. And each time I work with the company, no matter what the problem was, in my brain, it would make me think back of when I struggled with the same problem. There is no problem that anybody's dealing with out there that is unique. It's all the same stuff. We're all dealing with the same stuff. The situation is unique, maybe the environment and the people, but the problem itself, one of the comforting things about being a human being is if you're struggling with something, I promise you, you are not alone. If your business is struggling with something, if your relationship was struggling with something, you're in good company. We all are dealing with those things. So I was always thinking in my own head when they would talk about a problem with communication with their team or a problem with getting their team to perform. I had a recollection of in my career, either as the person doing it or the person seeing it having the same issues. And so I had this kind of mental Rolodex of stories that I would try to explain, go, hey, I get that. You're in good company. Here's how I was challenged with that. Here's how I overcame that, or here's some of the lessons that I applied. And what I started to realize is that there's a particular way you have to think as a leader that informs all the things that you do. Are there more than 5? Yes. I probably could have written 50 things in that book. But I really was able to distill it down to 5 things that I didn't say I'm picking 5. It just became 5 because that's naturally how it evolved was there's a certain way you have to think. And if you're not thinking that way, it's going to really cause problems with how you behave, which is that second half. And if you're thinking you're humble, you're probably not. If you're thinking this isn't a leadership problem, you're going to run into problems. And in some sense, they're pretty straightforward, but I wanted to explain it where I learned that lesson and how it applied to other people's lives. And that really solidified that a way of thinking, like you have to think a certain way to be an effective leader. And if you're not, you're going to run into issues. And that's really what the mindsets of a leader really became.
Right. So then the second part is about actions.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the first one, take ownership, is pretty much right in line with the echelon front stuff. One overarching question I want to ask you about this, though, is I think I asked this to Jocko too. I found that I think the principles apply everywhere. So leadership principles, values are ubiquitous in my estimation.
Yeah.
However, I think the challenge that I faced coming out of the military when I started running a company was the style had to be different and adaptable. And what I mean by that is within the military, certainly within the SEAL teams, the style was, while there was some variation, I would say it was minimal. It was, you kind of aggressive with guys. There's a lot of making fun of one another. There's a lot of cutting each other. I mean, none of this is bad. It's just the way it is, right?
Yeah.
A lot of profanity that's thrown out, right? It's aggressive. It's an aggressive environment because it has to be on some level. And there is variation. It's not to say you lead every single person exactly the same way. But when I got out into the civilian workforce and was running a startup company, that aperture got a lot bigger in terms of personalities and again, the style. So what's your take on that? Because that was going back to humility, that was the biggest lesson learned for me, where I was a newbie as a civilian leader and I'm like dropping F-bombs occasionally and kind of just, you know what I'm saying? Like
Totally, man.
Kind of military style. And I remember the CEO, I was the president of this company, the CEO, who's also a former SEAL, but he'd been an entrepreneur and in business for a much longer time, said, you got to tone that down a little bit. So what's your take on that? And how does that apply to the work you do in echelon front too? Because I'm assuming that comes into play.
100%. I think you're capturing it really, really well. And I'm thinking back, and I guess, and you might realize this in your own life too, but certainly for me, one of the things I was fortunate in my career is I started to figure that out before I got out of the military. And where I figured it out was, and you might laugh at this, was with my wife. So I got married, I don't know, a little bit later. I was in my 30s when I got married. I was just leaving Top Gun when I got married. And what I discovered was, as I, dating my wife, we get engaged, we get married, we get more serious and, things, settle into a relationship. As I got more comfortable with her, I started to interact with her the way I interacted at my squadron. And I'm guessing, there's obviously major differences between a SEAL and a pilot, but there's probably a ton of similarities. And at some point, and she probably said it like very delicately, but it was kind of like, I'm not in your squadron.
Yeah.
And I would talk to her and I think in some ways like this kind of like flippant, careless, really cutting remarks that in my mind is like, oh, I'm just being funny and it's all good. And it's like, hey, I can't talk to my wife the way that I talk to another pilot in a fighter squadron. And I'm sure just like the platoon hut, our fighter ready room is a brutal place if you're not I mean,
Yes.
it's brutal. And it's a little bit of a test too. Like, oh, hey, if Chris says something to Dave and Dave kind of gets upset about it, that's you're gonna see there's a little weakness in me. And I learned like, hey, I have to the attributes, like you said, I want to be a good person. I want to be a good communicator. I want to have good relationships. But I totally started to discover early on, like the way you do that is different with everybody. But to your point, different and the same. And the reason it's the same is the things that matter are the things that matter. Be humble, be open minded, be a good leader, trust your people, put them ahead of yourself. All universal, apply to everybody. But how you communicate directly with people is varied as the people themselves. And where and certainly at Echelon Front, we see this. This is also solidified with my kids. I never thought about it until I have 3 kids that are older. How I talk to my oldest and how I talk to my middle daughter, I talk to them very differently. And when I had my first girl shows up, I learned how to be a parent. The second one shows up, I've got this template. I communicate, I interact, and none of it worked. I'm like, what's wrong
Hmm.
with this kid? I'm doing everything I did with the first one. I've learned all these rules, and none of it is working with this kid. And what I discovered is the same lesson you just said is you can't talk to people the same. You just can't. They're
Right.
different people. And so I don't mean to say you change the bar. The bar is the same. We have a high bar, high standards. All those things are true. But if you can't figure out, especially leaving the military, you better think about how you are interacting with and communicating with people, or you're going to have a problem. If you talk to people like they're your squadron mates or they're your teammates, you're going to struggle. And I think part of that is just recognizing, while in some sense everything's the same, everybody is different and you better account for that or you're going to run into problems. And I think our tendency is, I'm going to blame you like, oh, Chris, you just can't take a joke or, Chris, what I'm telling you is just the truth. And I'm blaming you when I do that. In reality, it's like, I have to communicate with you differently. I learned that with my wife. I am reminded every day with my kids because they're all different. And it is true in every company, every employee, every person you interact with, there is a variation there. Nobody is the same.
Yep. I think Jocko had the exact same story basically. But I'm sure he tells. I'm almost positive when I was talking to him, he had some situation where it was the middle of his time in the military and he's talking with his wife in the kitchen or something, and she
Yeah.
stopped him and said, "I'm not a fucking SEAL."
Yeah. He's a better
Basically.
storyteller, but I can picture that of like, and I remember like, I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean that. Like, it certainly wasn't intentional, but it's easy to slip into that habit of that's how you are. If your frame of reference is your squadron mates, like you said, that's a very narrow frame of reference.
Yeah. You've mentioned a few times where it's like, yeah, this stuff isn't new. None of us invented any of these things, principles of
Totally.
leadership or anything like that. But why do you think companies struggle with it so hard? Because I often think I've been around this stuff a lot and I've read lots of leadership books and I'm
Yeah.
far from perfect in this regard. But I think at this point, I have a pretty good understanding of the basic principles here, right? And when things come
Yeah.
up, generally speaking, I'm not hit with some really revelatory leadership thing that I haven't thought of before. It may be a little bit of a twist on something. But why is it that why is there such a hunger and
Yeah.
seemingly need for this out there in the business world? Do you know what I'm saying? Like it just
I
feels
do.
like
I feel
like
that
why
question
don't people
at
get
my,
this?
yeah. I hate to say this, and I want to be careful. And I say this with our clients as well. And I got to be careful as I say it a certain way, but as human beings, we aren't necessarily made from birth or built or designed with the tendencies that lend itself to good leadership. So, like an example is, there's a bunch of examples, and I think probably the ultimate example is the concept of ownership. And you asked, I think, a very pointed question, like, why is this resonate so much? I think about the concept. One of the mindsets we teach is innovate and adapt. Be willing to change. And if I go to any company and go, hey, do you think your company should evolve and change over time? They all say, yes, of course. And I'll say things like, what happens to companies that refuse to change? Oh, they suffer, they fail, they die. What happens to people? Oh, they struggle. It's universal. People know that. What's also universal is that people don't like change. And like that is like in our genetic code, we are resistant to change. And I think about ownership. And if I ask the question, do you think personal responsibility is important? Yes, of course. Do you think taking responsibility for mistakes is a good attribute? Yes, of course. Everybody says that. But think of your kids. And I'm just going to make the same assumption that I make with every other adult in the world. How many of our kids were born with the tendency of wanting to take responsibility for things? And the answer is none of us. And so I think why this is people are hungry for this is that what extreme ownership did was deliver in a way a message that says, hey, your natural makeup, your natural tendency as a human being, your natural resistance to being humble, to being open-minded, to being flexible to change and to taking responsibility, you are wired wrong. In fact, you are wired to do the exact opposite of what you should do. And when my kids make a mistake, their instinct is to say, it's not my fault. And this now you have this message delivered in a way that says, hey, we can change that habit, that tendency, that natural behavior. And when people start to realize, oh, taking ownership, yeah, I know I'm resistant to it, but it's making my life better. When I'm like, hey, Chris, you know what? I kind of pointed the finger at you and I realized this really wasn't your fault. I was a big contributor to this and I'm really sorry. I'm going to try to do these things better. All of a sudden the relationship gets better, the outcome improves. And I go, oh, that, that worked. That violating human nature was a good thing for me. And I
Mhm.
think part of the reason why it's so critical is that it's really hard to change our tendencies, but when we do it slowly and deliberately, and we become a little more willing and receptive to the things that are being taught and our life improves, it kind of opened the floodgate for recognition that, all right, we're all wired the same way. None of us at birth are wired to take ownership of problems. We're just not like that. But if you can start to move in that direction, the impact is massive. And I think that created this massive hunger for teaching how to do that to teams. And we teach that. We teach how to do that. And it's had just this incredible response because it's made people's lives better. And it really starts with a recognition of like, ah, crap. I don't think my natural behavior is exactly right to be a good leader. So I'm going to have to change that behavior. I have to stop resisting change. I have to stop resisting responsibility. I have to embrace that a little bit more. And over time, it just becomes more of a habit. It gets better and people's lives improve.
What about change within a company in terms of the either the product offering or the
Yeah.
messaging? This is a really interesting one to me because you talk about it in here. There's the
Mhm.
old adage of if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
And yet, and that's true a lot of times,
Right.
right? It's like, why don't tinker with something that's working?
Yeah.
However, as a company to continue to be relevant, you do have to adapt and innovate and change. But my estimation and my experience is there's sort of, I'm pretty sure I was talking to Sarah Robb O'Hagan about this, who she's been so like the VP of like Gatorade and or some kind of VP of like Gatorade and Nike, like all these really big companies,
Yeah.
and struggled with this within those organizations of where the line is to walk with that,
Yeah.
because I've seen it both ways. You can not innovate at all, not adapt, stick to what you do really well, and eventually you will become obsolete or people will stop paying attention to you because you're just old and boring and whatever.
Yeah.
But then on the other end, I know my experience in the company that I was running for a bit, we got over our skis and we're trying to do too much, diversify the portfolio too much, lost really the drive on our core product, is which we should have done. We hadn't gone deep enough on our core offering before splintering off, and that hurt us in the long run. So
Mhm.
where do you think the line is between those things? Because I
Yeah.
do feel like there is a line you need to walk.
I agree. It's such a good question, and I think the way you asked that really gets to the core of why the book Dichotomy was written as the second book in the series, because in that scenario, and that's true for all scenarios, there absolutely is a line, there is a balance there, and if you say things like, "We're never going to change," you know the long-term path is failure, and then there's other cliches like change for change's sake and just a good idea fairy, like, you shouldn't just be arbitrarily changing things because some things should not change. And that was a key lesson in that book, that chapter in the book that you were just talking about for me. But it really gets to the core of this concept of balance is there has to be a balance in all those things, these opposing forces. And I think in this case, the two opposing forces are, should we be open-minded to change? Yes. Should certain things stay the same? Yes. Those feel like they're competing interests. But really what they get to, I think to your point, is you have to strike the right balance to get to the right line. Things that I've identified that I know are things that shouldn't change, assuming they're working, is core values,
Mm,
relationships with whether your clients or your people or whatever the interaction is, strong relationships. And so there are certain foundational things. And I think as a SEAL, this is something that you would probably resonate with extremely well, is the history of the SEALs has this common thread of an ethos, a belief system, a set of values, a set of priorities. putting the team first. And you could probably name several of them that I would assume have been a constant thread throughout the history of the teams. Aviation has some very similar things. And at the same time, if you took the kit and even the job descriptions in terms of the day-to-day things you're doing, there's probably a lot of evolution inside that.
Yep.
And had you guys evolved away from your ethos, I think the teams would have struggled. But what makes the teams unique, and I hope I'm not making these assumptions. I'm saying it in a way that probably resonates with you because it's the same. My experience is airplanes have evolved, technology's evolved. We've been forced to change, but not everything. And I think to your point is a company has to understand what that line is and look at the balance and look at the things that need to stay the same, the foundational things. And if you're making changes in technology or product line or those things, you better make the link back to those foundational things and explain why those changes are being made so the team understands it, or else you're just arbitrarily changing with no foundational understanding or belief, and you will struggle as well. And you alluded to it, sounds like that could have been something similar to happen to you. One of the things I think that's really cool about Jocko's podcast and all the SEALs he's had on is there's something about you guys, it's this thing, it's just the same. You have this intangible attribute that makes you all the same. And at the same time, there's so much evolution and difference and change that's gone on inside the organization that has been required by external forces and staying relevant. That's the ultimate balance, is striking those two things. And I think that's what companies and people need to do as well. Don't change everything. Don't change the things that shouldn't change. Identify, understand why, explain that, and then be really open-minded to evolving other things. And that, as you know, can be hard, but I think that's the line you're talking about. I agree with it completely.
When you go into companies, is there a specific thing or set of things that you see as problems over and over where it's like, yep, here we go again, same issue
Yeah.
inside this
Yep.
company? What are those
100%.
things?
I think the classic one that we see in most companies is something we call silos. And
Mm,
you and I know this from the military. And that I get to explain this every time I'm with a client. I describe this young 18-year-old, man or woman, altruistic, service of their country. They cut from the same piece of cloth, see something bigger than themselves, love America, love what they're doing, willing to sacrifice their life. And I'm like, okay, you're in the Navy, Chris, Dave, you're in the Marine Corps, and 5 minutes later, we hate each other. We're going to fight each other. Like,
yeah.
whoa, hey man, what's going on here? Why? And what that is a little bit of like siloed little tribalism. So if I'm like, hey, you're on morning shift and you're in operations, and Dave, you're on afternoon shift and you're in maintenance, we will create a rivalry against each other. And sometimes that rivalry gets really entrenched that we refer to it as a silo, where these teams that are really on the same team are fighting against each other. And our biggest competitor isn't some other company trying to take our market share. It's the other shift. It's the other department. I saw this in aviation all the time. We would do maintenance in shifts. We'd have sometimes 2 shifts or 3 shifts. And night crew and day crew would hate each other. The night crew guys would come in like, you guys didn't do anything all day. You're trying to break these airplanes and you guys didn't get anything done. And all of a sudden, there's this massive rivalry between these 2 departments of the same team, and it would be corrosive to the company. We call them silos. You combat that with cover and move. Is, hey, Chris might be a Navy SEAL, Dave might be a Marine, but we're on the same team. We're on the same team. And the ultimate example of that was Ramadi for us was Army owned the battle space. The Marine Corps owned the airspace. The SEALs were operating inside the city. The Marine Corps is operating inside the city. The Army is operating inside the city. And our chain of commands met at the Pentagon. So I could either like run it up the chain to get you to do what I wanted you to do, or you could do the same, or we could go, hey, why don't we put the rank, the title, and the service aside and just agree we're here to win together. And when we do that, I was like, I don't care what your uniform, I don't care what your rank is. We're on the same team. Those silos tend to go away because we were focused on the mission that's in the best interest of the organization, of the team. Just about every company we work with, there are entrenched silos and there's so much competition amongst each other. We have to realize, hang on, this is my ally. This is my teammate. I am not supposed to be fighting with him. And you know this in the military. We will go to war with each other. The Army and the Marine Corps, my way, your way, the Navy and the
Yes,
Marine.
totally.
And it's like, what are we doing here? Those are silos. We see them everywhere. They're easy to break down when you make a couple of small changes and prioritize relationships, but we see it almost universally. There are plenty of others, but that's really the biggest one we see is, man, stop fighting with each other. We're on the same team. And that's easier said than done, man, but it's common.
You know what's funny about that is I think that stems from just our human nature to want as social creatures, where
Yes.
we operate in groups. I mean, you hear this all the time, right? Like it's just beaten to our heads, but it is the truth is that we are social creatures. We like to operate in tribes, whatever the tribe looks like, and typically evolutionarily, it's no more than about 150 people before you can't have a close relationship with these people. But we love to operate in that. But what that means is that our need for tribe means it doesn't work unless you have other tribes out there that you aren't part of, right? Like you
Right.
can't have a group that has like a thing and a mission and a sort of core belief system if there isn't some opponent out there that's different from you guys. And I feel like,
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. You see, I've been watching stuff about college football lately, and you just see the amount of emotion and passion around those things where these are people that before they got to that school had nothing to do with this organization, and they
Yeah.
come in and you're inculcated into the belief system. And I think it can be really positive. I think that there's a lot of positivity out there, but there is a moment where you should step back and just go, okay, remember this is just a football game, and this is
Yeah.
like,
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
if I'm really going down the path of sort of hatred and that
Yeah.
attitude, like that is not worth it. That's not what this should really be.
Yeah.
So
That's another example of that human nature. There's parts of us that we really have to combat against because our natural tendency
yeah,
is to be siloed. That's our bias. I
yeah,
used to laugh at stories like, Charlie Platoon and Delta Platoon, like, I hate those guys. Like, hang on a second, we're on the same team. And a good
yeah,
task unit, builds good relationships. You can see very easily if I'm like, hey, you're an alpha, you're in Bravo. And if we're not careful, we can see that those two like are working against each other. And if halfway through I'm like, "Hey, Chris, you're out of Alpha platoon. I need you to go to Bravo platoon." You're like, and within a month, you're like, "Oh, those guys suck anyway. I'm so glad to be gone." And you can see how
yeah.
quickly we fall in the trap of that tribalism, that siloed, and we have to fight against that. But you're right. It's kind of part of the natural human makeup that we need to work against. But boy, it's so easy to just start competing with our own teammates based on whatever marginal difference we see, the shift, the location, the job description, the title, the rank, the name, and it happens a lot.
I have such a vivid memory that I'll relay here from when I was a plebe at the Naval Academy, right? So I'm a freshman at the Naval Academy. It was like plebe summer. I'm braced up against the wall. And I didn't come from a military background. I really don't know anything about the military at this point. I know I'm at the Naval Academy and I want to be there and everything, but I'm doing the plebe thing. And one of the upperclassmen, I can't even remember what we were talking about, but I just have this memory of him saying something about hatred and we're all angry about something or whatever. And he said, just wait till you start hating Army, meaning West Point, right? The US
Right, right.
military
Yeah.
academy. And I honestly remember sitting there and my immediate thought was, hate Army. Why would I do that? Like, that doesn't even make sense to me. And it was just weird.
Right.
It was like, start hating Army. Like, okay, I guess they're a rival school, but yeah, people still carry that to this day. And I'm kind of like, hey, these are other members of the US military. Like, okay. Like, it's not to say that I don't want to beat them when we play football against them. Of
Totally.
course, like I'm rooting for my team and everything, but it's sort of like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. Like, I don't care that much.
Healthy
But
competition is good. Hating each other is not good. We don't
I
want that.
totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. So I know we got to wrap this up, but let's the one that I want to hit, the very last thing in the book, the very last kind of lesson, so to speak, in the actions, is prepare for your departure, which I think is a really good topic that isn't talked about enough, which
Yeah.
is training the future of your company, of your organization. Certainly, if you're a leader, whether you're the CEO or you manage a division or a department or something like that, because especially in organizations where the leadership has been in place for a long time, I
Yeah.
think it's a problem. I think it's a big problem that people don't forecast, they don't come up with a succession plan, and you just never know, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what do you see when you deal with companies, and what's the
Yeah.
solution around this, the best way to prepare?
I think your last point was the one that I really cued in on both in my career and in the story I told in the book was that you don't know. Um, the concept of prepare for your departure really grew out of something I came to realize is a leader's job is to create more leaders, not to create followers. And unfortunately, especially we see this in private sector, it's not quite the same in the military because when I got assigned to a squadron, I knew I'd had 3-year orders, or maybe when you got assigned to a team, you knew you're on 36-month orders, or when I got my CO tour, I knew it was a 2-year tour. There's these time, and my deployment to Iraq was going to be 7 months. And so you had these little things in your head, like, okay, this is going to start and stop. And so one of the lessons I was telling in the book was I quote, knew how long I was going to be the CEO of the squadron at this really
Right.
important time, very pivotal change. And I had this life event where my daughter got sick that ripped me out of that job, no matter how important or critical it was. That was totally unplanned and unforeseen. And it totally threw off the idea that, like, oh, I'll be in this seat for a certain amount of time. In the private sector, when you have founders or CEOs or people that are part of a company, that could be 20 years, like you said. And we sometimes get in our heads like, this is just how it's always going to be. And the hardest part in writing that story was a story about a CEO who died suddenly, totally unexpected, at the height of his career in this incredible company. And the question is asked is like, is your team capable of handling that worst case scenario? It's not to be a bunch of fatalists, but it's this recognition of you actually don't know when you're going to be gone. So if you take the attitude of my job as the CEO, my job as the team lead, my job is whatever it might be, isn't to be really good in my job. It's to prepare other people to do that job, prepare for your departure. Your team will be okay when you leave. And in a perfect world, you leave exactly when you're supposed to, however you want. A wonderful career that leads to a retirement, a tour that ends at a particular date that you've always known, a decision for another better opportunity, whatever it might be. But you and I both know this, and we've seen this in the worst case scenarios, is you get sometimes no choice when that happens. And the worst thing that you can do to a team is that your unplanned departure is they fail as a result of that departure. The team's not ready to step up and cover for you. They're not capable of doing things. You were a single point of failure. You had too much control. You had too much influence in the sense that they were too reliant on you. And so the minute you become a leader, your job is to create more leaders. And the ultimate measure of your success is how does your team do when you're gone? And I think the manifestation of that for me, not just in business, and I have a business case that's heartbreaking. I talk about a personal story, which is very tough for me, but that's what we're trying to do with our kids. I am trying to raise kids so at some point in their life, hopefully on a natural arc of life, hopefully it's all just how we want it to be, but it doesn't always work out like that.
Yep.
Is when I'm gone, will my kids be able to live a constructive, productive, meaningful, fulfilled life without me? And I think as parents, we're like, I'm trying to help them to do that. And in my brain, like, oh, I'm going to age out till 100 years old and be this amazing grandpa, and all these things will happen. And I hope that happens for all of us. But that's not how it always works. And if my departure sets them up to fail, it's an awful thing. And so one of the things we have to consider is what are you doing now to make sure your team will be successful in your departure? And I stole a line from Jamie Cochran, our CEO, and the line is, good leadership outlasts the leader. If you're a
Mhm.
good leader and you have trained and taught your team to be a good leader, when you are gone, no matter what the circumstances are of your departure, your leadership will outlast you and they will be successful. And that's really the way you got to think as a leader is you're constantly preparing for your departure because you don't know when it's going to be.
Yep. Yeah. It is one thing actually that the military, because of just the nature of how billeting works, we do better, I think, or just we have to do it better. And I always
We
talk
know.
about
Yeah.
it's like the organizations in the military, they have their own kind of personality and ethos that is absent of any of the people there
Right.
because it
Yeah.
turns over so like the leadership turns over so quickly. Like you said, you go in, you know, 2 years orders or 3 year orders or whatever it is, and that's it. And then you're out. And there's people that stay there longer than that, like leaders further on down the chain. But the people at the top, they're not there for more than a few years at any given clip,
Yeah.
right? And
So true.
it's really it is one thing that I think is kind of unique to the military that teaches that lesson in a very good way. So,
Yeah.
by the way, have you sent an advanced copy to Tom Cruise to see if you can get an endorsement blurb on
No,
this?
I need it. I'm writing that down. That's a good
You
call. Got
should
to
do
get it in
if
his
you
hands.
can get
I like
that,
the
man, you will
title.
sell 1 billion copies of this book. So, um, so well, anyway, Dave, it was great to meet you. Great talking to you. If people want to connect with you, either personally or with Echelon Front, where should they go?
Yeah, super easy. Echelonfront.com is the easiest way to find our company. And I'm probably most active on both LinkedIn and Instagram on like the social world. And it's
Mhm.
just David R. Burke. My last name is spelled weird, Berke, but you could also just like Google Dave Berke, Instagram, and I'm on there. I'm pretty engaged there and not in too many other places. But if you want to reach out to me, the good news is like I'm pretty good about responding to DMs and whatnot. So if you have a question for me about flying or aviation or whatever, it'd be cool to hear from you. And I can't thank you enough for even mentioning the book and bringing me on. So this has been super cool, dude. This has been awesome.
Thanks for listening to On the X, the official podcast of the Navy SEAL Foundation and an Ironclad original series. Learn more at NavySealFoundation.org or text On the X to 60104. Please like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.